opposite direction, where your survival becomes in completely shunning away what is your culture in order to be normalized, in order to kind of just fit in and make sure that you have an easy route throughout this world. And with PSAB, one thing that we're trying to get to is how racism affects every single one of us, including white people, because whiteness is not it's not a thing. It's a concept. It's a construct that was placed upon these people when they came here. They had to strip their Britishness, their Irishness, their Italianness. They had to strip all of those things that we consider culture in order to be considered white, because whiteness was progress. It was a way to move forward. It was a way to move through with kind of minimal interruption. And it's in no way to kind of shun off the way that people kind of use that privilege to get through the world, and the way that that privilege can kind of negatively affect the rest of us. But I do want to kind of bring it there to acknowledge that all of us, every single one of us that came to the United States, that came to North America, had to be stripped of something in order to survive here. So in the way that we're going to move forward with this idea of solidarity, like, we're going to move forward from the understanding that we are all suffering ancestral trauma, whether or not you recognize it. We are all suffering from ancestral trauma. And if Black people are going to be, you know, working from that place and fueling their organization from that place, if brown people are going to, then we need to get white people to as well. We need them to understand what has been stripped from them, so that they can understand that they have something to gain in this movement. So I just wanted to kind of position that as something that I'm thinking about in this time, and also move us into a practice that Pieter Space has. It's referred to as the Deep Pieter. And I'm gonna kind of comment a little bit. I know sometimes it's what do you want to bring to the space, this container, and what would you like to take from the container? And I want to kind of reframe it as, what do you personally want to contribute to this movement, and what do you personally want to gain from this movement? I don't want to take too much of our time, so
Okay, I think she cut out a bit, but to sort of continue, right? We have this.
for people to share.
You cut out a bit, Sid, but I mean,
Oh no.
it's all good. I mean, this is virtual space. It's crazy.
Virtual space. Can you hear me okay? Am I still cutting out?
No,
it was just the last 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was just saying, Irvin, maybe you can advise if this is something that we have everyone do for themselves, or if we want to create an opportunity for people to share some of the things that they want to contribute and things that they want to gain from this.
I think it's definitely, it's something that I want you guys to, every participant here, to think about what it is that you, as Sid stated, want to provide to this movement, and what it is you want to take away from this movement. But I particularly would like perhaps just to begin our speakers to sort of say whatever is on their mind in regards to that question. And you guys can pop in whenever you feel like it.
I'll go. Yeah, I guess my contribution, or like what I want out of this, is to, I guess, collectively through these discussions, which I think is part of the reason we're all here, is like, we want to imagine a world where, I think we're all here to imagine a world where we aren't the direct beneficiaries of the world we're dreaming, if that makes sense. So often, I think, right, we're often pulled to dream for a better world that'll directly benefit us, right? Our bodies, especially if we come from marginalized positions. But I think today we're here in the space to, in some ways, give ourselves up, right? To dream something beyond, and to move beyond the kind of pull to be the center of anything, of any kind of fight for freedom or revolution. So that's what I'm hoping we're doing here today.
Yeah, I think just to quickly go off of that, it's probably just now like diverting from the Pieter, just to by answering, not answering, but you reminded me of this. There was this moment I think that I was in it was a, I think kind of like a conference talk, and there was somebody in the audience that had asked, how is it that we can um, make make giving up something beautiful? And that reminded me of that right now, because I think I guess I'm a firm believer that it's not always going to be beautiful, and it shouldn't have to feel beautiful for you to be a part of the revolution, I think. So yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. So I guess that's what I want to take away from it, by literally taking that thought. And what I would like to contribute is just the idea that conversation, I think, is another powerful tool with which we can sort of continue to pursue the bettering of our communities, with that in mind, knowing that it's not always going to be that the bettering of just society in general isn't going to be the best thing for everybody, right? Or the most ideal way of seeing it for everybody. So I think conversation is a powerful tool for that, because I think sometimes we tend to sort of say, especially coming from academia, I think we tend to sort of say, like, you know, read these books and like you'll get a better understanding of Blackness. But I think also, I think for those people who don't necessarily have access to academia, or who don't necessarily have access to like reading, right, like that aspect of conversation is also a powerful tool with which things can be learned. Yeah.
I'll go. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy and grateful to be here. I think what I'm going to take in is accepting that I have been complicit in upholding white supremacy as a non-Black person of color. And that's scary to just sit with that. And I'm going to give, I guess in a way, saying I've been part of the problem, I want to be part of the solution. And so to just fearlessly be okay with making mistakes as I'm on this journey of allyship to our Black siblings. And yeah.
I'll just say I want to bring an effort towards connecting the dots, connecting histories, connecting our struggles, connecting our joys. And I would like to receive new pathways.
Hi, everybody. I think that I'd like to meditate on Cydney's words on grace, that this dialogue between all of us can engage in a type of fluidity, in a type of softness, because alliances and solidarity is an incredibly difficult and challenging task if we choose to be in it for a lifetime. And it is embodied with so much struggle. And so as much as we can hold on to a type of grace and softness and fluidity as we seek to be rooted in our experiences and to connect across and with one another, I think is pretty valuable.
Oh, for some reason, these two questions are really challenging for me. I guess not both of them, but together. What do I want to offer, and what would I like to receive? What would I give, and what will I take? So I guess similarly to the rest of you, I there's, sorry, I'm struggling today. I just had an argument, not an argument, but like some words with my white partner. One of our neighbors across the street is selling t-shirts, I Can't Breathe, Black Lives Matter. And my partner was like, I want to support him. And also, I don't know where I would wear it. And I'm like, well, let's talk about that. And he's talking around his whiteness. I let him know I would be talking about him today, so it's not weird. And I got mad that he didn't want to say the word white. And so I had to check myself, like, oh, this is a nuanced conversation that we're trying to have here. And so I guess what I want to offer, and also what I want to take away, is empathy, right? Leaning into what Dr. Williams has said. Like, I can offer him grace because, yes, he doesn't want to make a mistake, like Isis was talking about. And so I think the sort of circularity of that is what I need. That's what I need in all of my relationships, at home and outside. And I try to move from there, and I also make mistakes, like I almost jumped down his throat, like, why don't we want to talk about it? Why don't you want to talk about it? And then, like, he's all, because of that, right? Because of that hardness that could come up. And so, yeah.
Thank you for contributing those responses, you guys. I'm at this point, I think, just like amongst the speakers, like if you guys just want to stay unmuted, so that like in a regular sort of this is a virtual space, so it's like already, it has its own dynamics, but just unmuting yourself so that you're able to sort of chime in, and we hear like that awkward background too of like the cat scratching the wall and stuff. It adds, I think, to the conversation. And then just a quick reminder too that we are recording, so if any of our participants would like to just not be a part of that recording, just go ahead and turn your cameras off right now. And you guys could also offer thoughts or any little comments or ideas in the chat as well. So Cydney Watson is back.
Sorry about that, guys. I live in mountains.
If you want to, continue with the next part of the roundtable, you can go.
Sure. You guys can hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone?
Yeah.
All right. Everyone can hear me. All right. So yes, thank you again to all of the participants. I feel a lot of that too. Accountability. I just want to be accountable for the things that I do. I want to be accountable for the things that I put in the world, and I want to feel like I can get that from those in my life as well. So I hear that, and I just want to echo it as well. So and something else that I was thinking about here. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes, keeping myself on track. So how are we going to sustain this work of solidarity? Because it is work, and it's an action, it's a verb. We're gonna put it into motion, and we are exhausted, all of us. We are all exhausted. This is hard, emotional, mental, physical work, and I'm just thinking about some of the ways, trying to think of what are the ways that we are going to hold ourselves accountable to the work, and where we are, meet it with honesty and transparency, and how are we going to sustain it as it continues and as things shift in our world. Yes.
I mean, I could point to going back to Alessandra's just like language around fluidity and softness, I think is so key, especially in moments of like confrontation, like what Bernard is describing. that do, right, have a certain effect on our energies and our bodies. Like I felt ill last week after having multiple conversations with family and friends that were that scenario that you're describing of like the moment of eruption where you kind of want to blow up. And for me, recognizably, it's like within my own Latinx family, who, right, seeing moments where their like whiteness really shows and their proximities to whiteness shows. And I think my first response sometimes is to want to elaborate on everything I've ever known and studied about our histories, our shared histories of struggle. But then I have to remind myself that, like, you know, I've dedicated my life to studying Latina and Black feminisms for years to get to where I'm at. And so extending the compassion of like, well, extending the compassion, I think, to ourselves to not feel like we have to take on the burden of constantly doing the work on the one hand. But I think going back to that language of fluidity and softness, coming to a place where you extend compassion to the people you're trying to help see, right? How their pain is rooted in a struggle that's entangled with these other historical oppressions. So I think, yeah, I really appreciate that language that Alessandra was pointing us to. That's really helpful these days.
Yeah, for me too, I think I was also kind of going off of what EC said, right? I think part of that sustainability has to come with acknowledging your own sort of a confrontation with yourself to see how you're complicit within all of this too, I think, right? Because you can't sustain sustain something that has no foundation to it. And I think that's probably a key foundation to the sustainability, is the ability to sit there with yourself and say, what are the ways in which I have been complicit within this? And that's both like, you know, overtly, but also the ways in which you benefited from this. I think, especially as non-Black Latinx people, we because we've had our own struggles growing up, right? That we forget about, like, we forget that other people struggle too, and other people probably struggle very differently from us. And we also forget, I think, that because we are lighter skinned, that we have this mobility between Blackness and whiteness that we sometimes fully implicitly use, but then sometimes we forget about it, that it's just there, right? And we've benefited from it in so many different ways, right? In the same ways that perhaps somebody with darker skin, you know, is stopped by cops, right? You are given a pass because of your lighter skin or because of your racial ambiguity. And so I think that precisely that that word of mobility is so important, right? Because it still gives you access to move around, and that moving around is still a lot more privileged than being held down, I think. So I think, yeah, part of that sustainability comes with acknowledging what foundational aspects are part of all of this, and that is, like EC said, recognizing, like, damn, I'm part of the problem too. Because if you just go out there tooting like the rest of you guys are, right, then that's no longer sustaining the bridge that's trying to be formed.
And I would quickly like to just kind of bringing to recognition too how within Black cultures as well, we have even through colorism, we have even found a way to like break down that idea of mobility even more. You know, a light-skinned Black person versus a dark-skinned Black person, and the way that they try to operate as separate, and you know, or try to, I guess I don't have the words for it necessarily now, but you know, you're talking about this within Latinx cultures, but I think that every culture has tried to find some way to like separate itself from Blackness, even Black people. And that's a level of accountability that you really, really got to get down to, because that's something deeply personal as well. And how do you navigate this deeply personal thing in a very public space as well?
Yeah, I think it gets, as a non-Black person of color, experiencing, even though I'm in the colorism spectrum, I think I fall more like lighter to morena, which is like a brown tone as well. And I think I've been able, well, I'll say my European features that don't appeal as indigenous looking have helped me navigate in a lot of spaces, a lot of predominantly white spaces. And so it has made it so that I have moved up in some ways, you know, through that my own colorism spectrum and my Eurocentric features. And so I also see that a lot in, I think Latinos are in this middle space of kind of falling into the appeal of whiteness. I'll give an example. I keep thinking about the Shakira and J-Lo performance. And I think when, you know, they announced that they were going to perform, I just kind of saw it as like, oh no, this is just me, my own opinion. Please take it as that. But I was like, no, we're not, like, we're just kind of, you know, there had been Black artists saying that they were not going to, you know, support an organization that was really mimicking white supremacy, or really, you know, institutionalized in that way. And so then what happens is like, bring on the Latinos. And it's like, Latinos are like, Latino power, it's our time to shine. And so in that way, we're kind of like, oh, but they're giving us a chance, you know, we're it's also for our people at the expense of what? You know, not being in solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters and peoples, you know. I see that as a way of, and trust me, I don't know what decisions, you know, there's two amazing artists that I love and respect. I'm a huge fan of J-Lo and Shakira. And I don't know what led, you know, that's not my place at all to say their decision-making at all. And then I also wonder, like, if our people, Latinx folks, made the anti-Blackness, anti-indigeneity complex that we have in our culture, if it became more of a conversation within our culture, I wonder if, you know, my way of thinking is prevented it, but obviously we're not there. We're here now. We're here now talking about how, you know, Latino folks have been able to navigate in the spectrum of leadership and moving up in corporations and positions of power. And you can still work in white organizational, you can still, operate in white organizational functions, which means like still caving into not realizing that your way of vertical power dynamic is still you know, having power over organizations or business or any of that, and not realizing that you're still working under that system. Even though you're a person of color, you're still giving into that system, I would say. But I find it that it's interesting because recently I've become very aware of saying I am non-Black person of color, instead of just being able to protect myself with saying I'm a person of color, because we can fall into that, well, my suffering matters too, you know? And at the end of the day, you know, I still serve privilege in this system. So I think as Latinos, we have a lot of work to do to really like get into those details of when we're using our POC card and when we're still navigating in that non-Black privilege that we have.
I think, too, in terms of those details of our intersectionality, we have in the chat here, Jasmine Stanley bringing up class. That's really important. I think, too, I wonder about, gender and sexuality in this moment. And so what is our work as Black and Brown people to highlight Black and Brown trans lives? What can we do? What can we do in this moment that Black and Brown trans lives matter? And I think that it's so important to remember our history, because our histories tell us the inextricable value of these relations. We have Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera as central to our history of how we understand the makings and the formations of these alliances and what they can create. And so I think that, I think it's important to bring into the conversation when we're talking about solidarity and we're talking about these layers of who we are as complete people, that Black trans lives matter and are a part of our solidarity movements.
So I threw my hands up when Alessandra spoke about the intersections that we all, not all of us, but that we have and that we work within. And also harkening back to what Isis just said about complicitness and in these systems and structures. So I often reflect and am conflicted about working within the academic structure, being an agent of the state, actually of the state of California, right? Being a professor, right? And like, how do I uphold these white supremacist ideologies just by being in this space? Mm-hmm. At the same time that I'm trying to dismantle these ideologies in the work that I do with the students, right? Through representation as a Black gay man, like visibly Black, and yes, and with an effeminate voice, with mannerisms that don't necessarily equate with the heteronormative. So it becomes a conflict, and so I try to look for allies and for folks that are working in the same world, and I'm often met without. Right? And so I have to move outside of that system to find allies and folks to work with. And it brings me back to empathy, right? If I'm giving empathy, maybe I can find some allyship that's sustainable, that's long lasting, that's enduring. Bringing all of the things that I become, all of my identifiers, how do they intersect? And if I can bring those groups together, then hopefully we can have a coalition that is varied and diverse and can speak to all of the levels in which we intersect.
I have a not fully formed thought or a few. One is just hearing you, Bernard, is also making me think of the ways that, the ways that all queer people are subject to being outcast from their own families, but also being outcast from their cultures when queerness gets associated with whiteness. And you're internationally, we can talk about how people in different countries say, gayness was brought to Africa from the West, things like that. But people, experience it here too. Walking in that way, talking in that way, that's that gay shit, that's white, right? Like that's a mythology that gets put on us. I don't have a, okay, so this is just like tree branches going in different directions. So I don't know if anyone also wants to talk about that. But the other thing I was thinking about in response to the other comments is, Cydney, you were talking about the ways that we group with those like us for solidarity, for safety. And I think we all know this, but I have the desire to say out loud that it is different than when white people who group together for safety, because our grouping together for safety is based on actual fact of threat of violence and real violence, not imaginary perceived violence. And that that protection doesn't always serve us. It doesn't always offer us the security that we desire. And I'm thinking about this world of academia and ways that we get pulled away from our families and cultures. The act of sort of teaching or learning in institutions is so isolating, and it's so antithetical to being a human being. It's designed for a very specific type of human being that probably never existed, but it is based upon, expectations of heterosexual white male with property and well, slaves, frankly. Like, it's based on someone who has all the time and money in the world to just do school at their leisure, right? Which one could if one were white male property owning at a certain time. And so when we enter those spaces, it can be, the language that we get hold of to, maybe describe something that we've always known, but we didn't know how to name, which is very empowering. But it can also be divisive. You go home on the break and nobody knows what you're talking about. You're using a language that nobody relates to. Or you're coming from a place of judgment, I certainly have experienced, I'm guilty of that, and sitting in that space of knowledge and maybe I'm a crier, sorry. I'm not sad, I just cry easily. Just having access to a language that has been given historic power, meaning academic language and English language as well. And then how do we use that to build the connection back to either find a new language or to use that language in solidarity with our community, so that we're not finding ourselves showing up to these institutions feeling empty, feeling like we're constantly emptying ourselves out because we have to leave behind the way we talk, the way we walk, the things we think about, the things we feel about, all the things that made us who we are, that gave them the ability to check the diversity box that they're so proud of, or somehow kind of get washed away. And then we're like, well, what community do I belong in? I don't fit in that space anymore, the hometown that I came from. And really, it can go for people of all races, just that disconnect, I think is really important. Yeah, that's all.
I mean, those are great comments. My brain is now swirling. It was swirling before, but it's definitely swirling now. So, I mean, I have to also check my own privilege. Though I grew up in South Central, like Normandy and Slauson, I also got to go to boarding school and to college. I'm the first in my family to do so. I don't wear it as a badge of honor. It is the fact, right? And all of the things that you list about separation, I now recognize is a tool of white supremacy, right? The language, the ways in which I choose to, I guess, code switch, and how readily I can do that. And now I think how readily I cannot because of practicing one more than the other, if that makes sense. So my dad is moving I like to tell anecdotes. Sorry, y'all. My dad is moving to Seattle. He's 60. And he has a bad back. He walks with a cane. And so he's like, come over to my sister's house. My sister has 7 kids. She lives on the east side of LA, down like below Manchester, like in the hood. And so I'm coming over from Leimert Park, away from my like really clean house with my white partner, you know, my graduate degree from UCLA, going to the hood. And they're like, oh, Uncle Bernard is here. And they're like, well, we need to do things different because he's here now. And that is not what I desire, but that is how white supremacy gets to show up in my Black family activities. And I can tell you, it sucks. This shit sucks. It sucks. It makes me so sad, right? And they're like, he don't know nothing about these songs. I'm like, I know 90s R&B, I know 80s R&B. Like, no, this was on Friday. And so, I have to remember that the things that you are describing as like this isolated thing actually spreads out very quickly, right? As soon as we re-enter a new space, all of the poison, I guess, that the cancer that white supremacy can be, spills out into every place that I travel. And I'm trying to be super cognizant of that now, especially in my relationships, my personal relationships, as well as my professional ones, right? Because I don't want to be this, like, the contagion. I don't want to be a living, walking, seemingly asymptomatic contagion, right? And so these are the ways I think I need help, right? In ways that I'm complicit, and how I can continue to like break down these fibers, because, you know, it's woven into the fabric, but I can break down this stuff. I have to be willing to do this work, right? And so keeping my eyes open, keeping my brain malleable, being able to hear, right? We were talking about listening and hearing. I think it's so important. Yeah, it's about the big things, the big splashy, like I'm gonna protest, and also like how you like do this internal work. And I'm by no means perfect. I'm like reaching for that 5th level, like, but I'm right here on one, on the planet Earth. And, you know, it is complicated, right? It isn't, I'm not going to use the term Black or white. It's not A or B, right? There's like A1. And there's all the ways, and there's so many steps to get to the next letter.
I wanted to come in too, because what you're saying about our families and kind of listening really resonates with me and sort of what I've been thinking about lately. You know, I think that our Black families, our Black parents, our Black aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins, have so much to say about this moment. It's been humbling for me to have conversations with my own mother, and we talk every single day, and she's been sharing things with me that she's never shared before. And just a couple days ago, we were talking, and my mom talked about going to school and having to use textbooks that had been given from the white schools. You know, my mother grew up in Louisiana in the Jim Crow segregated South, where Black children use these outdated textbooks from white schools. And that's how they learned. That's how my mother learned, was having to grapple with a text that was not fitting for young people really at that time. It was that which was discarded by others. And she talked about seeing the writing from these white children, from seeing their names in the books, and what that must do to a young person to have to learn from textbooks like that. And now I have a PhD and I'm teaching at one of the greatest universities in the world, and my mother had to learn like that. And if my mother hadn't forced herself to grapple with those terrible textbooks, I wouldn't have anything. And so I think that that deep, deep, deep listening of our people actually reminds us that we're holding on, and we're holding on to things that have been passed down to us that are deeply, deeply traumatic and painful. And we have to be talking to our people so that we understand how we got here and the value of our being here. You know, they have so much knowledge to give to us. And we have to keep talking to them, because just when we think that we know everything, we find out, in fact, we know nothing, and that they've only shared little pieces. And so we need a social movement for our people to tell us the truth of their lives and how we got to be here.
What you just said resonates so much, because I think a lot of us in academia, excuse me, like Rainey, I am strongly moved towards emotion, and I'm just going to write it out. Like that feeling of owing our ancestors and owing our parents and owing our grandparents. That's, especially when you're coming into academia. If speaking from my personal experience, I think when I joined undergrad, I had one undergrad of it, and like I'm the first person in my family to go and do like the next step. And you know, that's because that's all I knew. And for me, that was a big deal. I was like, okay, I got to take the next step, because they gave up things for me. They gave up things when I came along. They gave up, they had to work through these kinds of conditions to get here so that I could mobilize. And come to find out, almost all of them got into college. Almost all of them started college. Almost none of them finished. You know, and they want to give me that pressure of, you have to finish because life did things to us that didn't allow us to. You know, they were just like, no, go do it. We never even cared about that. We don't care about college. We didn't care. We were over here working and, you know, doing this and doing that. No, they wanted you to go because they needed you to finish that thing that they wanted so badly. And that's so hard to carry, because I don't know about all of you, but I know in my family, no one's talking about the struggles, or not talking about the hard things. Alessandra, when you mentioned like we have to get them to talk to us, and speaking with your mother and learning new things. I'm learning, my grandmother, who every time I get in the car, I go on a plane ride, she's like, do you know the statistic of car accidents from your house to the grocery store on the corner? Like, she's so particular. That's because when she was young, when she started college, before she had to drop out, she and her friends tried to go from Texas to Alabama to be with the Freedom Riders, and they got a Molotov cocktail thrown through the motel, one of many motels that they had to try to find because no one would let them stay there. And before they could even get to Montgomery, a friend died there. My grandmother didn't tell me any of that, but she should have. I should have known that so long ago. So, because it just would have fueled me in a different way. I would have understood her. My grandmother is not cautious from fear. She's cautious from experience. She's cautious out of my understanding of what the world can do to me and what the world can do to us. So that idea of transparency and language, as we go away from our communities into these spaces of academia and learn new language and learn new ways of mobilizing, how do we keep the language of being able to talk to our people strong and be able to, like, how do we pull both of those worlds together? And when do we start to acknowledge that academia, which we all strive for because of what it allows for us, academia is always forcing us to go away and bring it back, bring something back to it. It's always forcing us to go into our communities and bring something new, go and find these people and bring them back. Then what is academia doing for us if we have to do all the work to make it worth something, you know?
I see that, yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. I have seen that in most recently in having experience and working in the nonprofit organization world, how it's, you know, even within being in a group of all POCs, black folks and non-Black people of color, we fall into that so heavily. We fall into even facilitation language, facilitating the I hear yous or the check-ins or just these organizational ways of working always have this layer of like, this is the way that it's done, even though we're creating an authentic space for people of color to be in. But so long as we're working under that structure of the lens that we've been taught by being able to have access to these higher education spaces, we still fall into it, right? And so, and for me, it was the most like, just a couple of months ago, it was the most like out of this world experience. I was like, but we're all Latinos and there's Black folks in here. How are we still operating in this way? And hearing you all, I'm like shaking because it's so embedded and invisible. It just like seeps in. But then how do we authentically carry our ancestors, our lineage, our heritage, and unapologetically speak the way that we feel we are, and not be heard as threatening to a space or even just who we are, right? Because that whole sense of who you appear in this body already automatically puts you in a space of being heard a certain way, being seen a certain way. And then it has to do with the color spectrum too, that plays in. So you're like already existing in a space, even if you find yourself in a space with a bunch of people of color, but if we're still working under the nonprofit sector, which is white supremacist structure, academia, you're still navigating in those layers. So when are we ever just authentically ourselves? That's just what's coming up for me.
Yeah, I think going off of that too, I am in this idea of what's passed down to us, and the ways in which we're sort of describing the invisible cancer that whiteness is. I think of it just for myself, like as a non-Black Latinx person, right? The ways in which that whiteness is also passed down, right, through microaggressions that happen within the Latinx community against Blackness, right? Or well, by non-Black Latinx people towards Black people, right? And how that is also something to acknowledge, right? That we're passed down these positive things, but also we're passed down these negative things as well. And it's about sort of acknowledging that, because it's in that same format that that whiteness is also passed down, right? And whiteness maintains power in that sense. When you don't check it, when your cousin's quince and a comment slips out by one of your uncles, right? And it becomes so normalized, as Isias was saying earlier, that because it becomes so normalized, then you accidentally or you purposefully too pass that down to your children. And so in these ways, right, because we don't know sometimes how to call it whiteness or white supremacy, that we continue the cycle and we continue letting the cancer spread, right, in that way. So yeah, I think that's like what these comments were getting me to think about in terms of this aspect of what gets passed down and how that shapes us as individuals within the structure of whiteness, right? which gets me to think about was going to be my like next question for you all. And I think sometimes I think we say whiteness, right? And I'm thinking about what it means for people who don't necessarily understand whiteness, right? So my question, I guess, is what does whiteness or anti-Blackness look like in the communities that you come from? And you know, I think the look like is also kind of like a weird concept to think about it, right? Because I don't think that we can see it, right? And so maybe what does it feel like? What does it, and how are we sort of, I think it just goes to, your comments and your answers also go to show how we're so deeply embedded within it that we can sometimes see it, right? And then we can sometimes feel it, but then sometimes we're just kind of gliding through it. So that's, I guess, my question for the group.
I want to tie that question a little bit. I did want to say, just to tie back, you know, the conversations on like the traumas, I mean, most of the panel has inherited as like, you know, and being in academia, the kind of traumas. I want to share in on some of that, but also take note that we're inheriting ancestral trauma, but I also believe that we're inheriting, we still inherit, that they're not, our ancestors aren't quiet, right? They're still here guiding us, and there are strategies still available to us. The trauma's there, right? But so is the strategy. And Alessandra's point, you know, of like, right, asking your mom the question, you know, about her life. You know, I was reminded when I was having a very difficult conversation with my mom this week, that I did not practice listening very well. My partner, we came home and my partner lectured me and was like, you didn't ask one question. And that was such a necessary moment for me, because he was totally right. I did the thing that academia tends to train us for, which is you're to be the voice, right? Voice for the voiceless, which is such a fucking myth. Excuse my language, or don't. It's a myth that we are fed and we are trained, right, to take on that position, which comes from like the kind of narcissism of the white man. And so, right, I think that question that everybody's asking, you know, what strategies can we use to deal with some of those traumas, I think is like, definitely asking, I think, our parents or grandparents, which might be like a risk, right? There are some tough wounds they might not want to open, right? So I would add like maybe listening generously, and understanding that those moments are really tough for them, right? As tough as they are, right? You know, nearly all of us was moved to tears right now. So, and that's the opening of a wound that everybody was kind of going through right now, a kind of shared experience. But you know, that trauma, right? It stems from, you know, that's kind of, you know, Bernard, you mentioned boarding schools. I mean, I thought, you know, indigenous folks who were, that's what school was for, right? You're supposed to separate from your family, and then you go back and then you educate them and teach them how to be white and good Christians. And in a sense, right, that scenario gets reenacted within us, right? It's like, it's a scary, right, an awful and painful thing to recognize that scenario might present itself to us sometimes as we're having these conversations with our families. But then, right, finding strategies to like undo that, and that's going to happen, right, in collectivity with our families and with our ancestors. And it's you know, even if it's not written, it's in the music, it's in, right, all of us, right, dance collective, right, like our bodies carry these things that are known and felt, right, to foreground like Black feminism in the flesh, right? It's here, and it's here and it's present, and it's not in the past, as much as, right, people maybe want us to think that is the case. But so I want to connect that a little bit to this question around whiteness, because I think it relates to some of our training. But like, I guess I want to share a little bit of an anecdote of like how whiteness has sort of been recognizable to me. And I think for me, it's because my brownness has been situational. right? Very light. I was like praised as, you know, el güerito growing up, and then when I would darken up, the you know, I would look moreno, and then there were certain, right, snide comments about that. But then also, right, I think my brownness for me became more apparent through my queerness, if that makes sense. It was like that moment was where I began. It's the intersectional oppression that sort of visibilized and then called out my own whiteness too. And I've been sort of going around that question of like, you know, when am I brown? And then trying to also recognize, you know, when am I white? And sort of Latinx folks tend to sort of refuse to call themselves white. But we are, and there are some of us who are white. And, you know, Spanish colonialism, it's just that in the US, our whiteness gets positioned situationally, right? Specifically through the US-Mexican border, right? Which allowed Mexicans to stay as long as, and this is in, right, the treaty that was signed, as long as they got rid of their Mexican character. So the only people who could get rid of their character were white Mexicans who would just not speak Spanish anymore. But right, so then white Latinxes spread violence against their indigenous and Black counterparts. So attending to those historical violences. So like those are ways I think in which, like, for me, I see the fractures of whiteness, right? It's a lot, I think sometimes it's a lot sneakier than people think. But it comes with, I think, learning how to read your body differently than you've been trained to read it, and learning how to read your body in relationship to other bodies. And I've been going around this question a lot recently as I've gone, like, where my whiteness is. And definitely, I think my class, my proximity to whiteness, because I was in academia, and also my pull towards the middle class now. You know, I studied at UC Riverside, and then I came back home. So I've been getting all those feelings of like, what does my education mean here? I'm still writing my dissertation, which is painful, and I'm still trying to write it for my community. But I find my voice constantly, right, on the edge of like having to defend myself, right, or talk to somebody, a white reader who's actually not who I want to talk to. And so navigating all of those feelings as I've come back to teach, and I made a deliberate choice to come back to teach at the community college I attended, which is a predominantly Black and brown community college. I was kind of very exhausted by the kind of elitism that I was feeling within academia, but not to say that went away within the community college. I mean, it's within even our own departments and faculty, right? It spreads, it's everywhere. But I think I've been heightened more to my position and my pull towards whiteness within a kind of educational system, even at the community college level. Though I would say that community colleges tend to be a little bit more conscientious of their position within that elitism, but there's sometimes that desire to, because you know you're at the bottom, to want to elevate yourself and to pull yourself towards that elitism, if that kind of makes sense. So I've kind of been looking at that within myself, you know, where is, what's my situational proximity to whiteness, depending on the various spaces that I'm entering, depending on, right, me entering the classroom that I was once in, but it was a very different position that I was in years ago when I entered that classroom in that community college, and then now as a faculty member. So yeah, that's kind of the web of whiteness that I've been thinking about lately.
If I can add anything, Jose, in hearing you articulate your thoughts and that, it makes me think about how we as marginalized communities and just people of color who want to enter these higher systems, right, that we categorize as the goal, right, of this is what it means to have made it, of how much we're actually choreographed and conditioned to feed ourselves into this whiteness, right, whether we sometimes are conscious about it or unconscious about it. And I think it's it's interesting that we're learning, as you guys have said earlier, we're learning all of these tools, right? And I think of these tools as survival, right? But the divide that comes with going back to your community as well, right? The loss of relationship that exists within there. So it informed that we're doing two labors, right? It's also how do we untransition and unlearn the whiteness to fit back into the community in some way, at least in my interpretation. And then how do we abandon that in some ways to reinsert ourselves into these higher systems that literally just function on whiteness. And even this idea, as we're always talking about, this idea of diversity, inclusion, and equity, we all know that looks such a certain way. And even when you're presenting research, who is this accessible for? And who does it reach it for? If you have one word in there that's Spanish, what does that mean? We have to change that. It needs to be translated. And it's like, why? The big question of why, right? And then we always talk about how do we dismantle the system? And it's a complex thing, right? Because even when you do have people of color within the system, right, they are shifted and choreographed in such a strategy, I feel, you need to fit the box of how we see diversity to feed the institution, let's say, right? And I think I've had my own share of struggling with those, and I am a very light-skinned Latino Mexicano, you know, and the European ancestry that I have is, I mean, very evident, you know. So sometimes I feel like when I have to claim these ideas through my queerness, I feel that my queerness is what is speaking the whiteness the most, and using that queerness to use that Latinidad to really make the voice for the community, or for the community to be heard through these systems of whiteness. So I feel like sometimes what I'm hearing is it's almost like we're having to untrain ourselves and improvise our way through these systems in order to continue creating conversation back and forth through both community and this idea of dismantling these ideas.
That's right. I mean, I really like, right, the cueing of choreography there, right? We are trained to choreograph our bodies in a certain kind of way. And also, right, we can think about this, and we should think about whiteness intersectionally, right, with patriarchy, right? They function together alongside heteronormativity. These are, right, systems that rely on each other. And so our pull to whiteness often is also a pull to look like a certain, right, a white man, a man though. And so some people get like a kind of, it's like one way to think about it, right, is like white women have access to patriarchy, right, that some people of color do not, right? And it's because of their whiteness, right? So patriarchy kind of functions in that kind of strangehold. And so, yeah, I think that we're having to undo, I think, the kind of gendering and racialization that that we get marked by, I think.
I think it'd be helpful too to bring in what's being said by our people here who are with us. Kristen Nicole Hollyman has brought forth Fred Moten's undercommons, and I think that text really resonates with what we're saying about whiteness, the academy, and also how sort of diversity gets co-opted and integrated into this white supremacist project that is the university. And something that Fred Moten talks about is how that process of professionalization is so central to reiterating this white supremacist project. And what we have to do is to really look closely at our labor. And when I reflect on that from this past year, just finishing my first year at Rutgers, something that I really tried to do was to bring in women of color feminism and sort of this intersection of performance and anti-white supremacist ideology. Something that we looked at, for example, is how yoga, this amazing source of power, can also reiterate into fundamentalist ideology. And so that labor, you know, for me is a part of how I do my own work in Black and Brown Alliances. I'm an artist with a company called the Nanya Dance Theater that is rooted in South Asian dance practices and this intersection of Indian dance practices. And that work for me is the kind of alliance work that I do across Black and Brown communities. But this past year, sort of assigning that work was very challenging because I had to have conversations with some of my students who didn't want to have that conversation. And some of their struggles with that material came up in the teaching evaluations, that they had no desire to deal with white supremacy and what it might mean in dance. And so for me, it was difficult to have these difficult conversations with my students where their energy, you could tell that they were really having a hard time and were having a sense of rage, we call it that. And then I have to be calm and I have to hold space for them to, you know, sort of let out their anger and their discomfort. And I have to do that calmly and with compassion. And then I have to come home with that, holding that, having held that. And where's the space in the university for me to be held, having held my students as they go on their journey? And that is hard. That is hard. That is hard. Something that's been useful is we have a vice chancellor of diversity. She sort of created these conversations with faculty of color called soul saving dinners. And it's helpful to hear other faculty across campus saying these same things, that they, you know, look at their teaching evaluations after having assigned these works that help them to think about white supremacy, and students really having a hard time. And so what do we do? What do we do with that work of the undercommons, of thinking about our labor and how to craft it in a way where we're challenging how we understand what the university does when we come home with these feelings that, you know, are painful because we haven't had space to work with other people to try and work through what we've held for our students. You know, that holding that in spaces.
I think that's truly important, and I think it circles back to that at first initial sort of idea that Cydney put forward, and that was this aspect of sustainability, right? And how sustainability, I think, for the time that we're in looks very different and comes about different ways. And I think that is one such valuable and important way to think about it, the ways in which, you know, Black and brown people are learning to sustain themselves amidst this time, and how we're able to learn to find better ways of sustaining each other through this, right? Because, yeah, I just continue thinking about how important that aspect of sustainability is to that, to solidarity. Because I just continue thinking of all of these things as different forms of foundation for solidarity, or different forms of practice for solidarity. So yeah, and going to also, I'm trying to see in the chat.
The chat started popping.
Yeah, chat started popping. Samad Rahim Guerra, who says, this makes me think of the importance of developing and maintaining protected spaces and relationships, right? So the importance that solidarity is just by actually learning to take care of each other amidst these moments, and how we can develop spaces to do that, especially within, you know, spaces like academia and the university, right? Even just like, you know, EC's mentioned earlier, this whole idea of like nonprofit organizations and the ways in which we as artists too have to appease the demands of, you know, white structures based on whiteness. And so sometimes that gets me to think about too this aspect of code switching. I think sometimes we think of it so much as strategy, right? But I also think of like the repercussions of code switching, and the ways that at times code switching can still uphold whiteness, because we are attempting to appease whiteness with that other side of us, right? And how it is that we can learn to develop new strategies, because I think we've always been sort of conditioned to think of code switching being one of the only strategies as, you know, people of color. And I think if we can sort of reformulate sometimes, I think the new strategies that don't always appease whiteness, then we can continue sort of finding ways of dismantling whiteness, as crazy as it's embedded within, you know, whatever we do. So at this time too, this conversation has been amazing. I literally feel like we could keep talking until like my time, midnight, 3 a.m. time, where Alessandra's at. I want to be, you know, respectful of everyone's time. So what I'm going to do now is switch it to a Q&A, and if you, I believe all the participants were able to unmute themselves. So you want to unmute yourself at any point, do that to sort of share your thoughts, your ideas. We want to respond to something that was said. And we're probably going to allow the session to continue until probably 7:40. So if either our invited speakers need to leave or if participants need to leave, please feel free to do so. But yeah, if you have a burning question, comment or anything, please go ahead and either write it into the chat, or you can you just unmute yourself.
Hey everybody, I'm Chris. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So thank you to everybody for opening up, speaking up, you know, seeing what we're seeing lately. It feels like it's like a huge weight on everybody to carry and to just keep quiet and keep on moving on. But it feels like if we all know that assimilation is key to success in this existing construct or system, capitalism, of course, is what I'm trying to say. Why do we keep trying to reconstruct and match the existing one with our own flair or flavor, rather than try to build something new that's more unity-based, sustainable, inclusive? Why don't we try that? You know? Or how do we attempt that without getting shot down?
I can answer, well, I'll tell you this. I recently had a very personal experience with that, with speaking up about use of power dynamics within an organization, and especially a space in which they were talking, or the space I was in was very honed in about social justice and decolonizing and voices of the unheard and all of that. And I found myself that I was given these like privileges of, you know, being able to just still do the work that I do while having my baby with me, and that was such a privilege. And in a way, I felt like it was a bargaining of like, okay, so just keep your voice down, you know. And when I chose not to and to speak up, in a sense, I was fired. And so what happened, so that's and here's the other, the way that assimilation works, or the way that why it's not that easy, because by the time someone is speaking up, it's usually one person, because no one else wants to step into that. No one wants to lose their job. Nobody wants to lose that opportunity, right? Because for us people of color, it took us this much to get to even that space, you know? And so then that happens, and who's holding those people in leadership positions accountable? How do we, I don't know. I'm in the same question as far as like, how do we organize to call in and not be scared to actually speak up? Yeah, I find myself, I think I wore many years to not say anything or to just kind of go with it because I was getting to get paid for what I love to do. And at the end of the day, I tested that white organizational way of working, which is professionalism, and was fired. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's I think for me it was just being scared not to lose my job.
I think, am I unmuted? Yes. That's a really important question, Chris, and I wanted to respond, and I hope that this is like my first reaction, and it's not at all the answer, and so I hope that it doesn't like shut down the importance of the question. In my mind and what I see, there are like these two ways to respond to the problems of the institutions that we're talking about. So there's what Isis is talking about, which I think of as like infiltrating, and it's a word that I've been like meditating on a lot lately, and I think all of our communities have been infiltrated, and so maybe like the counterattack to the contagion that Bernard is describing is like us infiltrating the system, not assimilating, but going in, and you know, you take off the mask and you have the machete when you're ready, you know, the metaphorical, because, and in small ways and big ways, right? And sometimes it's just a conversation, and other times it's like, oops, I redid the whole curriculum when you weren't looking. Oh, well, this is what it is now. And you know, fight me over it next year, but it's already done. Sometimes it's, you know, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness, for those changes that need to be made. And I feel like that's largely the avenue that I take. But even with those small things, like you're describing, there's this risk of being fired. And, you know, that's cute when you're 19 and living at home and you're like, I'll find another job. And then it's not cute anymore.
That part.
Yeah.
That part.
Yeah. Not so easy. Especially for artists of color. And so then to me, there's this other road of just working completely outside of the institution, which is really important and so admirable and so real, and has always happened. And that's what, you know, Cablocolos are. Like, we have had always runaway slave. We have had always other ways of being that are pre-colonial and anti-colonial. And those come with even crazier threats. I mean, how deep this fucking capitalism sickness goes is that people get arrested for like planting food in their yards. You can get arrested for taking food from a dumpster to feed people. Like, we've made that illegal. Like, that's how crazy this is. So if you look at something like the MOVE organization in Philadelphia, who's like, fuck this noise, like nothing in the system is working for us. We're gonna raise our families our way. We're not gonna use, you know, any mechanism of the system that we can avoid using, we're gonna avoid using. Well, guess what? The police literally shot them up like they were, you know, enemy to the state. So there's a very, very, very real threat to life and liberty to operate outside of the system. And my hat goes off to all those who pursue that. And then I guess the other option is to infiltrate, which is not a weakness. It's not an easy thing to do either. I think we need to continue to think about whatever option that we're choosing to somehow acknowledge that it is choice, that there are always other ways of being in the world, which seems really impossible sometimes.
Yeah, Rainey, I mean, that's so important. I mean, it goes to the first comments on like the question of survival. I think we also need to give up the myth that there's a single way to dismantle a system, right? Also, it's like often that's what we're taught, right? It's like what new system will replace the one that we are currently in, right? This is what we're asking, right, of the institutional police system, right? Which is why we're having this conversation too within our own respective positions with in the various institutions we're involved in. But I think, well, at least within your reflection, Rainey, I really get that sense, you know, it's like that we need each other, right? And in that needing each other, it means that there's not going to be a single system, but that I like that language of like infiltrating in the collective and sort of realizing that that we're all contributing, or right, if we're down for it, if you're down for the revolution, you're contributing multiple strategies by which to dismantle something.
Mm-hmm. Hey everyone, my name is Samad Rahim Guerra, and I'm just really glad that this space is available for us to dialogue and talk. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. I had an interesting thing happen the other day where I was talking with a good friend of mine about their experience at a protest, and they seemed upset that people were dancing. And as a dancer myself, I didn't see a problem with that at all. And if anything, I see it as an effort to move away from conservative attitudes around how to move our bodies and how to be and take up physical space, and colonial attitudes as well. And after that, I saw a video of a good friend of mine in the Bay Area. The video is kind of going viral right now. And they were at a protest, and there was this huge fleet of police cars coming to keep the peace, right? To enforce the law, if you know, you want to see it that way. And she starts up rocking and top rocking in front of the cop cars. To the point where it turned into what looked like a Beach Street moment, right? Where all these dancers are up rocking and top rocking to where these cars left. Reversed, and they went back to where they came from. And there was this huge moment of celebration, and everyone was, you know, super juiced. So I guess this is a question to all of you is, and I have my own answers to this question, but how do you see dance and movement and ways of moving our body as expanding the way that we fight these systems of oppression? I love that you said, you know, there's no single way, and people are going to be needed on all fronts. And so I kind of pose that question to all of you.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. It makes me think of this, you know, most recent protest march gathering in Minneapolis to the mayor, Jacob Fry's home, right? And central to that journey there was this pause, you know, to have this dance break with New Black City, queer Black community of artists, to lift up the people and to have this space really for radical Black joy at the center of this march and this movement to the mayor's office to defund the police. And I think that that is such an important recent current example of the value of performance in this moment that we have to lift up the people.
And to add on to that, we know historically, like ancestrally, Africans especially, there is a dance that precedes every war. And so we know that our embodied resistance comes through dance. That's how it's been, and that's how it will be. We lead with our bodies. That's how it goes. And so, yes to them. My second hometown, Minneapolis. Oh my God, doing the big things, shaking the system up. I was having a talk. I talk with my partner a lot. We talk about a lot of right. And I was like so upset when I got my stimulus check, or whatever it's called, right? And I was like, oh, they had this money this whole time. They had this money this whole time. So if we could, in a moment's notice, change everything, then we can change everything. Like, what's holding us back? And I think it's our, and this is not like to be antagonistic, it's fear, right? Because that's what's ingrained in the systems. Right? EC spoke about fear of losing her job. Yeah, it's scary. Right now, I'm actually afraid to be on the front lines because of my health, right? And hearing all this stuff about comorbidities and da-da-da, right? As you call, you know, so thinking about how dance can, or the body largely can be the engine that fuels our revolution is something that I'm always thinking about. Working with Dr. Shamel Bell on the street dance activism really like changed my concept of what activism can actually be. Enlivening the spaces that are dead because of white supremacy. Bringing in this joy that Alessandra's talking about, right? This radical joy in the face of all of this adversity. Like, ooh, we're gonna march to the mayor's house and have a dance break? Come on. Like, we are calling in our ancestors every time we do that. And so, yeah, oh gosh, oh my gosh.
Yes.
I do want to say as a Latina, I find myself because I have embodied dances from the African diaspora, I find myself having to say that they come from Africa, especially when I'm teaching Latinx folks, because I think the ancestry and the root of the influence of the displaced peoples, African people that were then had to reside in Latin America, North America, influenced our culture completely. And I think it's, having traveled and taught and performed and danced in these forms, I became more present to embodying it fully, and also I had to say it out loud, because I think for me that was my way of also undoing that supremacy, especially in Latinx culture. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty, we are technically at 10 minutes past time. There's like this part of me that doesn't want to finish this conversation at all. Like, I just want to keep talking. If there is like one more like last lingering question, that we can go ahead and close it off with that one. Is there somebody who chimed in?
I would love to chime in, Irvin.
Oh, hey, Belle. How's it going, girl?
Yeah. Okay. Hi, panelists. I love all of you. I'm so happy to see Dr. Al, who was a really just ferocious teaching presence at the Sean Graham Institute at Ananya Dance Theater last summer. Your lessons stay with me. And just want to lift up, too, that you are now a professor, a tenure track professor at Rutgers University. And how long it took you to get there, and like I hope you've been having the best first year of your life. I can't wait to see you again. We got a lot of catching up to do. Also, Primera Generación Dance family, I love all y'all. Love EC's Bernard, Jose, I don't know you yet, but we'll be homies one day. Rosa, you're dope too. So I just love all of these people here so much. So I'm bringing that like all of these faces here, like this is the revolution, this is the uprising, right? Like we need to, this isn't going to be the last conversation we have, because we all very much share an ecosystem and will very much continue to be in these conversations. I'm thinking a lot about radical imagination these days, thinking a lot about what Ricardo Levins Morales teaches. I've been reading poetry by Aurora Levins Morales too. And somebody already said this, but that is, I think Bernard, it might have been you, but that it's fear holding us back, right? And I think what we're seeing now, because everyone is kind of like honed in on social media, we have the resources, we have the strategy to abolish the police, abolish the prison industrial complex, abolish ICE. We have the technology and we have the strategy to do all of those things, right? And so I want to hear from the panelists, and maybe this is a good way to wrap the things up. But like, what are you imagining in the future? Because knowing that we only lack the political will, and knowing that we have resources to dismantle, to transform, and knowing that it's only a struggle of political will, which I think we are winning, right? Let's keep that in mind, we're winning. What are you imagining for the future?
You're muted.
Sorry, I said I'll start, and I said it's not exactly an answer, but to quote that movie I can't remember the name of, but I always think this, because it was like the language that this is like my mantra for life, that fear is imaginary. Like fear is imagination. It's not the real thing happening, it's the imagination, right? And so we think about like arts as imagination, like you have to use your imagination and creativity to make something that isn't there. But like, let's just reverse that and say that fear is this thing, all of the shit we're imagining, and that everything that we're doing already and everything that our ancestors have done to make it possible for us to be here after 500 years of colonization, that's real. That's the real thing. The strategies of song and dance and marching and organizing that already happened or are happening now is the reality. So I guess I'm not imagining, I'm watching it happen.
I think something that I'm imagining is really intentional collaborations. Going back to my point about dance in this moment, I think that dance really has a critical role to play in helping us to embody and to physicalize collaboration, and collaboration that moves and destabilizes unnecessary hierarchies. And so I think that we really need to turn in on the kinds of relationships that we have in the world right now, and to mobilize those relationships with deep, deep intention towards justice.
Right now, for me, the imagination is just really rooted in friendship. I think like, I haven't thought about friendship, I think, more in my life than now, with like the shelter in place, with, the revolutions that are happening, of like, just how powerful friendship is as a tool that can create possibilities. And I think that's it. It's like, it goes to Rainey and Alessandra's points. Like it's, all of us, I think the imaginary is not possible without some kind of relationship, right? And so we need each other. And I think that, right, well, we were talking kind of about how do we find a language to talk to our communities. But I think, right, it's languages, and that's how we get to the imaginary of a different kind of future, is to see that we're working multiple languages to get there and multiple bodies to get there. And it's right here.
So I don't know if anybody's seen this show. I've been watching a lot of TV. Watchmen. I'm late. Like, it came out in the fall of 2019. And there's this Dr. Manhattan, this blue character who was once a white child and ends up being a Black grown man, and also is blue. And he is in all times at the same time. And so I've been thinking a lot about temporality and the sort of construct of that. So, like, maybe we are already in our future. Maybe, like we talk about in the abstract, that race is a construct, that time is a construct, and yet we still operate as if they're real. Mm-hmm. But I also know that I am Black, and there are things that make me very specifically this, right? But I can also, as we've been talking about this the whole time, right? We are also mobilized, even though we're stuck, where we move into these other spaces and we become other people. And then, so like, how do we tap into this idea or to this notion that we are already everywhere? We're already in liberation. Mm. And so if we're already liberated, why don't we act like it? Mm. And so I understand that there are actual structures that hold us in place, but as we were talking about before, it can happen. And so it takes, yes, imagination to sort of let go. Like, I guess it's an idea of letting go. Because it's a weight. Come on, Erykah Badu. Yeah, all these bags, we can let them go. And so I think about it a lot. I try to get it into practice. It's hard. Like, we sit on the couch, he and I, all the time, just like going back and forth, like we're really smart, just talking, trying to figure out the world's issues. And when it all is said and done, we realize that we have everything that we need at our disposal.
Thank you, Bernard. My husband came on here because he's been watching The Watchmen, and I was like, come here, Bernard's talking about it.
I can't wait to do.
He did bring up Mr. Manhattan or Dr. Manhattan. I'm sorry.
Dr. Manhattan. Yeah.
So my undocumented borderland self, when I think of imagine, I'm like, imagine no wall. That's what what I first go to. But I also find myself in this space of like imagining vulnerability. I see, like, the way I could characterize America is this this entity that just that is too scared to come to terms with what happened, and they rather protect themselves, so they'll build walls, put fences around themselves, because it's too scary to be okay with saying I'm sorry. And so I just imagine vulnerability, just from all of our parts. From me even not admitting that that I'll mess up as an ally, or that to my family about anti-Blackness. But that's just what I imagine coming from and living in a space of vulnerability.
Yeah, I think when Belle articulated her question, I was sitting with myself thinking for a while about the ways in which I imagine. And sometimes I sit there, and even just like right now, just writing my dissertation, I get stuck. And I think of the ways in which my own imagination is stuck sometimes. So I guess to answer Belle's question, I imagine imagining differently, because I think sometimes even my own imagination is so constructed by something outside of myself that I think if I imagining differently, then that will be a part of this revolution, right? Because I think moving outside of those things that continue to sort of constrict us is so important right now. But Jose, have you been able to answer the question?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, has everyone? Alrighty. So that was a beautiful way to close. Belle, you're always coming through with the magic. Thank you, girl. Like, amazing. Again, I want to thank each and every one of you that showed up today. Your presence is so important in this time, right? I think I'll circle back to what I said in the beginning. I think a tool for this is conversation and understanding your role within this current political crisis that we're in. And, you know, logistically too, I just want to also mention, you know, the proceeds that are allocated to Primera Generación for today's event are all going to Black Lives Matter. So your presence just being here automatically, yeah, and then Rosa's putting it up for you guys, automatically is helping, right? Automatically is part of this revolution in a certain way. And I think that the part of imagining differently, these events that we've put together through Primera and in collaboration with our friends that have, you know, decided to help us and join us for this, has been, what is our role in this and how can we continue to sort of visibilize something that can't stop being visibilized. And so we wanted to also produce this sort of virtual space for, especially for people who, you know, have this desire to be out there protesting, but because of things like COVID, because of things like health, can't do it, right? And so finding ways of virtually protesting with one another. And I think us coming together here in community is a way of doing that. So I thank you guys so much again for being here. If you want to leave any last minute comments for our speakers in the chat, do so. We have posted a link to their bios in the chat as well, so you guys can continue sort of following them wherever they're at in their life. They're all amazing individuals who are each doing their own form of, you know, fierce revolution in their localities. And again, thank you so much for coming to today's roundtable. And then just one round of virtual applause, loud or unmute or muted or unmuted for our panelists. Gracias a todos.
Thank you, Irvin. Thank you, Primera.
Yeah. You guys.
Adios. Adios, Joel. Good to see you.
Bye, Joel. Bye, Yanni.
Adios, Gabby. Ya se nos va la Gabby. Yanni. Kristen Holloman. Where's she at, Miss Holloman? Hey, there you at. Hey, girl. How you doing?
Thank you. So much love. Thank you for this.
Miss you.
Bree.
Besos.
Bye.
Bye, Gabby.
Kelly, how you doing, girl?
Gabby.
La Gabby.
Bye.
Adios. Bye, Maggie. Bye, Lindsay. Oh, wait, no, Lindsay's not leaving. Stay. I thought you were like slowly disappearing. Yeah. Hola, Alicia. How's it going?
Alicia.
That was dope.
Thank you so much for coming. That question was dope. I was like, shit, I don't imagine like I used to.
As usual. Es un cohete ella.
Yeah.
Hi, Milka. Hi, Dorothy.
Hey, everyone.
For supporting. Hi.
I just want to.
Hey, Dorothy. And then Marvella, who's still here, I think, maybe.
I just want to thank you all for your incredible work and consideration, and for like just taking such amazing hard grip on these reins for the series. And so I just want to thank you for that. And then for all of you who are with us today, like I'm so moved. And I also just want to say we should talk about coming weeks. Like, I feel like I don't want this conversation to end, but anyways, we'll be in touch. But I just want to thank you all.
Of course, thank you. It really means a lot to us.
And it's good to see all of you too.
No, thank you for supporting us and our visions, and being there, admin wise, and with your own support as well. Thanks so much, Mocha.
Thanks, everybody. I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Dorothy, for your constant admin help as well.
It's so nice to be able to see you. It's really so rare that I'm able to make an evening event, and I'm so glad I could be here tonight. It's really, really moving and just so important to be able to hear these voices. And thinking about dance as a part of this, so important, so important. Thank you for having such a quick response.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Malleability also part of the revolution.
Readiness.
And then gracias, Jose. Gracias, Bernard, for being here with us.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
This was awesome.
Gracias. Gracias, chulos.
We literally were when we were coming up with this idea. I mean, your guys' names were just popped up into our heads automatically. So
Thank you.
Inmediatamente, tú sabes.
I was so quick to respond. I was like, can I just text you the info?
I still can't believe you're in Sacramento.
I'm in LA right now, but yes, I'm there and will be there.
Yeah. See, the connections keep going through dance.